The purpose of my intention experiment is to try to demonstrate that the scientific story that we're given about the way the world works is very incomplete. And much frontier science that is unfolding now demonstrates that the idea that we've had that the big visible world is composed of single objects with no effect on each other is not really true. New information is coming out in quantum physics groups around the world demonstrating that big things like molecules, the sticks and stones, building blocks of the large visible world, are in a state of potential. And by that I mean a state of not quite something yet. They are many different selves. And so they seem to be influenceable. We've also discovered that whole notion of quantum entanglement, this invisible connection between subatomic particles within atoms and molecules, again, the building blocks of the universe. So the idea that there is one rule for the world of the quantum and one rule for the world of the large is not actually correct. It seems to be that the rules of the quantum world, those strange counterintuitive ideas, also affect the world at large. What I'd like to look at with my intention experiment is the effect of multiple minds trained on a particular target. I am using scientific laboratories around the world and the technology of the internet to bring many, many people together to focus on an intention all at the same time. I'll have some sort of target where the outcome we're looking for will go against what we expect, go against what is perceived as the natural order. So initially, we're looking at just whether or not our multiple minds, and there are thousands of people involved in this process, will be affecting some target. We're looking at whether or not we can affect biophoton emissions of a leaf. That's our first idea. But eventually, we would like to take things like wound healing, because we know that wounds proceed in a particular rate. We can measure that, and it usually is undeviating. But if we can send an intention to speed up that process, that will have a huge impact, and that will be, that will have many implications. We're also looking at things like a mini world, a little mini Gaia, that would be a terrarium, and we would artificially raise the temperature and then ask our intention group, our intention readers around the world, to send an intention to lower that temperature. And of course, if we could do that, the implications about global warming and our ability to affect it would be astounding. And so on. We're looking at maybe trying to affect a child with attention deficit. But in every case, our intentions will not be, and our intention experiments will not be about winning the lottery, but about affecting some philanthropic target, using our thoughts to change the world in a good way. I don't really understand exactly how emotional freedom techniques work, but it seems to have something to do with the mind affecting the body and an instantaneous recognition of something that immediately has an effect. That is mirrored in many, many other kinds of disciplines. If you look at the placebo effect, that's an intention. Biofeedback, that's an intention. Hypnosis uses the power of intention. Mental rehearsal in sports, all of these things are about the power of the mind to have an instantaneous effect on the body. And we know this because we know the brain is kind of stupid, and the brain can't distinguish between an action and the thought of an action. We see that in many studies of mental rehearsal in sports. You find that the body, when you use imaging systems on the body, with just the thought of, say, skiing, downhill racing, the same muscles are activated as though you were actually carrying out the run itself. So the brain can't distinguish between an action and the thought of an action. Doctors view their roles in a way like a car mechanic. They go to the body and they try to repair it. They don't think about their mental influence on the patient. And we see this in many cases that the doctor's positive or negative attitude can actually have a profound effect on whether the patient lives or dies. Larry Dossey calls it hex deaths. When a doctor gives a diagnosis, he delivers a death sentence in a way if he says you've just got 3 months to live. Oftentimes, patients will follow doctor's orders. One of the most fundamental elements in this healing relationship is to understand that it is a two-way street and the doctor has as much mental influence on the patient as he does physical influence. So his thoughts about the patient and the patient's abilities to survive are very, very important. I saw this in a personal sense when my mother-in-law had cancer, and ordinary doctors believed that she had 3 months to live. We brought her to a specialist who uses mind-body techniques, and he looked at her. She had breast cancer, and her breast was really ravaged by cancer. And when he examined her, he just said to her very lightly, "We can handle this." And that, I'm sure, had one of the most profound effects on reversing her cancer, because within a month, all of her cancer was gone. There are numbers of studies of the therapist-patient relationship, but most of them have to do with healers, not medical doctors. And the studies I've seen have a number of really interesting aspects. For instance, Dr. Gary Schwartz at the University of Arizona conducted a number of studies of healers trying to heal bacteria. And he found that they had variable effects. Sometimes their healing worked, sometimes it didn't. So he wasn't really sure what was going on there, but he decided to see whether or not the healers themselves had any effect, whether or not their feeling well in themselves had an effect. So he gave them a questionnaire about how they felt, whether they felt well physically, mentally, their well-being in every way. And he found a correspondence between when healers felt well and their effectiveness as healers. So it suggests to me that the healer himself has to be feeling well in every way to have a maximum effect, and that his own well-being has a profound effect on the healing relationship. In my book, The Intention Experiment, I created a program called Powering Up, which I took from both the scientific literature and also many interviews with so-called intention masters. That's Qigong masters, Buddhist monks, and healers, to try to determine and distill what techniques turn them into good and effective intenders. I also looked at what works in the laboratory, what kinds of conditions maximize the effect of mind over matter, and from that pulled this all together in this Powering Up program. One of the most effective techniques in using intention is intense focus. And by that I mean getting into a meditative state and focusing on your intention in a very, very profound way. When people think of meditation, they think of the mind slowing down. But in looking at some of the studies of intention masters, like Buddhist monks, I've seen that when they are in a state of very strong intention, when they're trying to have an effect, say a Buddhist monk is trying to change his metabolism, as they're able to do, he enters a state of very, very intense focus, and his brain doesn't slow down. His brain begins speeding up. It's called a gamma state, when the electrical currents of the brain are moving at a very, very rapid rate, It's a bit like when you are attending to something with every pore of your body. So I suggest that people try to use mindfulness meditation. After they've stilled their minds, they try practicing on a focus, practicing on some focus of what they're doing at the present moment with all their 5 senses, and not think about what they're going to do over the next day, or what happened yesterday, or what they have to do that day, or what their children are doing, but just focus on the moment. And that's a kind of mind technique that helps you learn how to be a very focused intender. Another important element of my Powering Up program is the whole idea of compassion, of sending your intention out through your heart, not just your head, so that you are feeling compassion for the target of your intention. So in the case of the doctor-patient relationship, if a doctor could go in with the intention of healing and have a very specific intention on his patient to heal that aspect of the body, so he sends it out, and he sends it out through his heart, that would be remarkable. That is not just about being a car mechanic. It's about using his mind-body to affect his patient and entering into a kind of a contract together. In my research, I was interested in looking at what happens between the sender and receiver in intention. And I came across a number of really interesting studies called DMILs, or Direct Mental Influence on Living Systems. One of the most interesting is a study called the Love Study, carried out by the Institute of Noetic Sciences. And what they did is they took a real live drama, patients with cancer, mainly breast cancer, and their partners. And they trained the well partners in sending healing intention, using focused attention, belief, and compassion. So they put the person with cancer in one room with a video camera trained on her, and the partner in another room with a video screen. And whenever his partner's picture came up, he was supposed to send her a healing intention. And they had both partners wired up with things to measure brain waves, heart waves, all sorts of things like that. What they discovered, and this is the case in many studies, is that when someone sends an intention, the brain waves, heart waves, many areas of their physiological systems start becoming entrained. By entrained, I mean they synchronize. They start mirroring each other. It's a bit like having two pendulums moving next to each other. Even if they're out of sync, eventually they'll start moving in sync. There's a little exchange of energy that goes on. And scientists wonder whether or not the same thing happens in healing intention, that when the sender is sending out intention, it gets mirrored in the body of the receiver. Certainly the evidence we have so far suggests that. Doctors talk about the placebo effect as though it is something to... Doctors hate the placebo effect because... No, I won't say that. Medical scientists don't like the placebo effect because it confuses their results. When they're trying to test a drug and they're testing it against a placebo, so many people react to the placebo positively that it oftentimes messes up the results. But if you look at the placebo effect another way, it just demonstrates the power of intention. The placebo is another example. The placebo is a wonderful example of intention. The placebo effect works about 60 to 70% of the time. And in fact, it's believed that something like 60% of all medicines are actually a placebo, that doctors oftentimes prescribe inactive substances with just a little bit of the active substance in there, so because they know that the placebo works so well. A recent study in the British Medical Journal of cardiac patients looked at this and discovered that it didn't matter whether patients were taking the actual cardiac drug or a placebo. They both worked absolutely the same. The only important element was whether the patient actually believed that the drug was going to do him some good, and if he followed doctor's orders. So what this means is that a doctor can take advantage of the power of belief, the power of intention, and send an intention to a placebo, and the patient can take the placebo and believe that it's going to work. It doesn't matter if it's a drug. The placebo is the greatest drug there is. A wonderful example of that occurred at the University of... a wonderful example of that occurred in a hospital in Houston. A group of doctors decided to carry out a study of arthritis patients, doing an operation, Half of the group got an actual operation to fix their arthritis, and the others just had a sham operation where their legs were just opened and shut with nothing done to them. And the doctors discovered, after monitoring the patients for 3 years, that the patients given the sham operation felt completely well after they had the operation, and they carried on feeling well. In fact, they did better than the people getting the operation. So my own contention is that the power of the mind is so strong that we don't actually need drugs. We just need good intentions.